Welcome everybody. I'm Andrew Baum, and I'm with the Andrew Knight and Titus from Berlin. Titus, could you introduce us to yourself first of all?
Sure. Thank you very much, Andrew. So my name is Titus. I'm a co-founder of RELXData, a German technology-based company. And maybe just one sentence regarding the background of our company. So I was working actually for 8 years in the real estate industry, and I always had the same struggle. And I was thinking we need a technology solution for the struggles I'm facing, because otherwise I think no other talent is willing to join that industry in a couple of years. And two of my main struggles, and we're going to jump into these ones a little bit later, were, first of all, I was not actually a real estate consultant. I was an Excel crunching consultant. And then I was not a real estate professional dealing with real estate issues. I was then doing I was a researcher, professional researcher. And this could be interesting if you want to become a researcher, but I wanted to do other things. And these two things, actually, Excel crunching and doing research for quite some time, decided or made the idea of RELXData, and RELXData was born. So that's a quick introduction.
Thanks. That's Titus. So tell us a little bit about RELXData, Titus.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we founded the company in 2016. So we're live now with the product since October 2018. And actually, we yet only have German customers. And that's also why it's great talking to Andrew. And we're about to kick something off. We can introduce also in a little bit, maybe. And we are a team of 40 people, 2 offices in Berlin and Barcelona. So the whole European idea is living within our company, and hopefully at some point we also have an office in England. So that's what we're trying to do. We are typical, I would call, I'm always trying not to call ourselves prop tech. So that's because, like a lot of MDs and CEOs think, oh, these guys from the prop techs are coming, they have sneakers on, and they can tell us a little bit about technology and about AI and all these things, and then they go away. But the issue is actually we have to make money, and I mean we have to pay salaries, and that's why we call ourselves a young technology company. And so since October we launched our product, and we really have tier 1 customers, international customers like Brookfield, Colliers, German listed customers. You guys probably won't know. Areal Bank is one of our customers, Europe's biggest financing bank. So a wide range of customers, as I think all these customers within, or all these players within the real estate industry are facing different issues. And I think with our solution, we were really targeting one solution which is needed and within the industry.
That's great. We'll come back to RELX and your data proposition later, I'm sure. You're also an RICS member, I noticed, Titus. So given that the topic is the RICS relevant and fit for purpose, you're an RICS member, I'm an RICS member. So over to Andrew, who is an RICS high technocrat.
Well, I'll take the flattery, Andrew. I suppose the irony is that I'm not a member, but I work for RICS, so I could probably give a perhaps not a unique perspective, but a different perspective, not being a chartered surveyor by trade, but having worked now for RICS for 10 years. During my time at RICS, I sit now in the overall directorate that deals with standards, regulations, and thought leadership. But I've also worked with engagement with the City of London from the perspective of the financial sector, where I did a lot of work in the kind of valuation area with those stakeholders. Prior to RICS, I've had a general commercial and technical background, and dare I say, I'm sufficiently old that when I first started using computers and technology, it involved Fortran and punch cards, which are probably 2 words that some of the audience may not recognize, but that belies my old age, I'm afraid. So I've seen a lot of generations of technology come and go. I've done a lot of work over the years with sort of SQL databases and database development. So come to the kind of the world of surveying, and to some extent continue to be surprised about how we remain fairly primitive, if that's not too strong a word, in many areas in terms of how we look at data. And at our ICS, as well as looking at the impact of data and tech right across the profession in terms of thought leadership and preparing our profession to take advantage of the opportunities and manage the risks, I've also led a development piece around data standards that particularly reflect the international standards that our members work to, whether that's around floor plate measurement or life cycle costing or valuation itself or the overall due diligence process. Because I think what's very interesting about real estate as a use case for data is how wide ranging that data has to be for due diligence, and therefore how it needs to be gathered from so many different sources. And indeed, from a behavioral point of view, that some of the challenges are more around the mentality of sharing and setting up data sets within real estate than necessarily some of the technical issues. In a previous life, I worked for a large US internet ad serving company, and we had a division that looked at data pooling around FMCG consumer data. And many years ago, we were data pooling very, very competitive companies, putting all their transactional and lifestyle and demographic data for households into a database. So we had data on every household in the US and the UK, and we were doing what would probably be now described rather loosely as AI, but it was effectively regression modeling and shade to look at really quite predictive models around consumer behavior based on millions and millions and millions of transactions. So it always fascinates me still that there's so much of a journey left for real estate to understand the benefits of sharing data and getting data into a form where it actually can create value.
I mean, it's fascinating, isn't it, that we don't have standards which apply or practices which apply across Europe in the simplest things like how to measure a building.
Yeah.
You know, from the outside wall or the inside of the inside wall. Is that because the RICS has just failed? You know, it just hasn't done.
I think failed is too strong a word. We did put a lot of work and continue to do a lot of work working with other professional bodies around the world, because I suppose the professional body landscape to some extent mirrors the whole landscape of real estate, which is it's a very fragmented industry. Whether you look at the construction sector or the ownership of commercial real estate, that there are so many actors and players, and with a number of our standards, I'll be honest, they've been some more successful than others in terms of adoption. We spent a lot of time working with other professional bodies to generate the international property measurement standard, which is being adopted bit by bit. But I guess, to use the slightly oft repeated phrase, it's turned into a marathon rather than a sprint, because you have to some extent resistance to countries agreeing to use somebody else's standard, a degree that certain pockets of real estate can still feel very parochial on the basis they're quite happy to measure in a different way in a different country because they're not doing comparisons, they don't have international portfolios. So there are still challenges, once again, from a behavioral point of view, I think, because there's nothing wrong with IPMS from a technical standard. It works, it does the job, but there is still this resistance, and some of it is down to, dare I say it, the fact there are a lot of leases out there that still are either on Comp 6 or Hong Kong IS or whatever it is, and you don't necessarily, if I can be quite bold, want to remeasure sometimes because it may throw up some interesting new numbers.
Yeah, I think the land registry have exactly the same problem when they think about digitalizing the land registry.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Titus, how important is it that in your business that there are data standards, or is that a sort of an inefficiency that you can exploit?
I mean, that's actually where we come in and make our money, right? I mean, real estate, again, also Germany's second biggest transaction market within the world, and this market is so fragmented, and they are so, what you just said also regarding measurements. I mean, we have the RICS, and then we have even German associations giving out like measurements on how to measure spaces, and even there they cannot agree on somehow on a standard, right? And we thought about, if we are trying, and a lot of associations have done it and tried it before, to put in or to bring in a standardization form or whatever, this won't work out, right? So our idea was more or less to really be the API of the standardization. So you can come to us, or to any like competitor, but the idea is you can come to a technology company and you don't need to have the standard, right? And this is what we're actually doing. And I think this is where technology, and there are a lot of borders of technology and misunderstandings of technology, but I really think technology really can help here to make standards for everyone.
So on that topic, I mean, one of the ideas I've been thinking about recently is I was in a podcast once with somebody from OSCE, OSCRE,
Yeah.
Data Standards Organization, and we were talking about disruption and prop tech and in particular AI. And I also work with a couple of companies that are using AI to crawl over Excel spreadsheets and put the data in the right columns, the right rows, by recognizing what the data is. And it dawned on me that maybe any attempt to create top-down data standards is ultimately going to be washed away anyway by AI, on the basis that sooner or later an engine should be able to crawl over any document and recognize that is rent per square meter, and that is the capital value, and that's the address. And what do you think, Titus? And I'll come back to you as well, Andrew.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Am I blowing smoke, or is that not the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is sometimes what a lot of people are over expecting within technology, and buzzwords are out there, especially in the real estate industry, and the Germans are very, very slow in adapting and getting used to things. That's just for sure. I'm German, I can say that. And they are also getting afraid, right? So the real estate industry in Germany, I think also the UK, they were adapting a lot of things very fast, and then they don't really use it and they jump to the next one. So we were here doing rating of buildings, then technology came, then AI came, then blockchain came, all gone already, all implemented, and now we have ESG, right? So we need to be, I think, a little bit we need to look ourselves into the industry, and also the associations and the technology companies, and be really honest on what things and technology can do. And I think what you said, Andrew, like, to really help on standardization, this is something where we can use technology, AI maybe, to really get standardization in there. But we, as the technology companies, definitely need also the industry and the association to really get acceptance on it. And this is sometimes not very easy, because there's not much trust sometimes in technology. I have so many people in my office, often a quote by real estate companies: "I don't need your technology, they can type it in and then put it into spreadsheets." And I mean, this is not really the way of coming into the future, I think, and this needs to change also from a mindset.
So, Andrew, just the specific question. I mean, is there a role for top-down data standards, or will technology supplant that?
Well, I think to some extent that and I know one of the rating agencies is using a lot of AI to kind of extract data to get it in the form that it would like, particularly to look at real estate debt. I think that the challenge remains that there are a lot of unstructured pieces of data around real estate that will still be very, very challenging even for AI to bring out. I mean, I know there's a lot of experience of people using AI to do lease abstraction, but you still end up with a kind of a hard sort of 10-20% that needs that kind of human intervention. And I would argue, kind of putting my database design hat on, that you still need a kind of a destination taxonomy and schema for that data to then to be placed in a repository or a data lake, for then to do the analytics and extract the value. So even if you've got that top-down clever AI that's pulling data out into a usable form, you still have to describe and agree that you're going to call something as prosaic as net initial yield the same thing in different systems. You at least need and this is perhaps where data standards can get a bit too granular, because we ultimately need to simply agree that we call the same things the same names.
So labeling,
and I think that there's a role also for data standards where you do need to recognize that a lot of the data will come in still in its unstructured form, that maybe some very clever AI and natural language processing can try and parse and try and get some value from. But I think in many jurisdictions we're at such a kind of low point that we can barely even agree to have unique identifiers for property to make sure we even agree the asset we're using. So I think there are some basic things that we do need to do. And I think having some taxonomies and data standards, particularly to allow people to map from multiple systems, because we're never going to wave a magic wand in the short term and get rid of all these jurisdictional standards. And ironically, the more we get prop-tech startups building systems, we get yet more proprietary schemas coming into it. So we do need, in my view, a kind of a Babel fish, if the audience gets the reference to Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, where we have some kind of way of mapping between systems and at least getting some consistency, that if we call something the boundary of a parcel of land, we can agree how to just label the coordinates and some really kind of simple stuff.
Yeah, I mean, you're on the side of the angels. I'm sort of going to put sort of three possibilities to you, that if we were to arrive in the right place, and on the assumption that we will arrive in the right place where this problem is less of a problem in 5 to 10 years' time than it currently is, it'll have been achieved either through government enforcement or through an institutional solution like the RICS, or through a monopoly, through a business becoming so powerful in this area that it determines what the standards are. And we can see that happening. And if we sort of talk about the elephants in the room, you can talk about the battles between or with CBRE, EGI, CoStar, Jones Lang, Cushman, trying to work out how this is going to evolve and failing to get sort of a solution to that, so that we're in this sort of business competitive situation with the data business is now worth more than the surveying business, which is fascinating. But can you really compete with that sort of tendency to technology monopoly? Are we inevitably heading to a tech and data monopoly in real estate at one point, whether it be CoStar or CBRE or maybe Amazon or Google?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I suppose that they're opposite ends of a spectrum in some respects, aren't they? The Amazon and Googles versus the CBREs of this world. I guess what interests me is back to that behavioural piece, that it's not about the technology, it's about who's actually going to almost cut to the chase, who's going to start sharing net effective rents. Yeah. And really pull data, because it's easy to build a model where you store that stuff, but who's really going to say actually that from a kind of and I'll be perhaps fairly bold here and talk about the fact that information asymmetry works to a lot of market participants' benefit. And are we really going to break that kind of information asymmetry that exists, particularly in commercial real estate, and simply have an open, transparent market for data and almost place more value on the analytics than actually just the simple raw data of what's out there?
Yeah, that should be a commodity rather than a prized possession.
Yeah, and that's I think more than technology, and I can't see anybody at the moment either cornering the market for all that data or wanting to let other people get that data.
Yeah.
I mean, also coming back to the who's going to make the change. I think it's going to be a little bit of a mixture. I think whether an association or the regulation won't be able, or the industry, I think we really got to partner up a little bit on that. And I think this already works. And this, I think the fit for purpose is there already for an association being really willing and having a person like Andrew, a technology understanding, and someone who's really also talking to the technology partners to see, all right, how can we partner up? How can we support the technology or the companies? And the regulation is also, I think, coming in at some point, what you just said regarding the rents. I mean, everybody, especially in Germany, we are even way worse with market data than you guys. We don't have anything. We only have asking rents on marketplaces, right? That's all we have. No rents are published, nothing. And even if the notary, after the signing of the SPV, needs to publish the purchase price, it's only published to an authority where they keep all closed. Nobody's getting in there. And then after 2 years, 3 years, you get results of the current prices 3 years back. And I mean, this really doesn't make sense. And I think regulation needs to come in at some point also, because most quotes we are receiving once we're at customers, they are always saying, we want the purchase prices, we want the real rents, but we do not want to start, and we don't want to publish. And I mean, this is the circle of problems. If nobody starts, I mean, it won't change and won't move on actually. And I think, yeah.
So Titus, what exactly is your business model, if you don't mind me asking?
I mean, we have three core pillars on really supporting clients. For example, banks, we're really supporting what, Andrew, you just described in the rent roll sheets. They're receiving thousands of rent roll sheets within a year. And back in the days, they had a lot of analysts trying to crunch these data and to get this into the risk system. They couldn't, for example, answer questions to the ECB. What's the portfolio share in hotel once COVID-19 really raised up? And there they figured out, all right, we need to answer these questions. We really need structured data. And this is what we're actually really doing with RealX Data to support companies structuring their own data to accesses, to really do analytics, in a faster way than having the machine room analyzing something, coming out with an analytics and then say, that's actually not the question we asked, and then they go back. So yes. we are in the field of analytics, and of course we are a young company and not really specific to one single analytical solution. It's more really trying to help the companies within their digital strategy to grow and to access data.
Great. You're what I call, if you'll forgive me, I do call you a prop tech company sometimes, but I talk about the big picture for prop tech, but really the important businesses right now are doing the plumbing, the engineering, the nuts and bolts, and sort of building the system from the bottom up is the way that we're going to go. Even if companies don't understand the value of the data they've got, they know that they need to understand it at some point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Andrew, there was a question from John Redfern on the chat. If you can have a look at that when you get the chance and respond, that would be useful. But don't worry, not immediately. We've got plenty of time. Plenty of time. While we do, I'm going to hold up my dad's RICS diploma certificate here from.
Oh wow!
So everybody points out all these diplomas that I've got behind me, but I have to remind them that most of them are 1947. So I hope that they don't think that they're mine. I mean, what is the RICS's place in the world, Andrew? I mean, is it unique? Is it global? Is it really British Commonwealth? And how does it relate to ULI, FIABCI, and are there any other global players that could do what the RICS does?
Yeah, I mean, interesting question. I mean, clearly we are global, and we're not just necessarily a company that's gone global to follow the map of the world that Queen Victoria would recognise. We've gone global in a sort of, I think, a very balanced way, in the sense that we have members right across continental Europe, as Titus represents, the Middle East, North and South Asia, ASEAN, the Americas. So we've gone global in that sense. On the other hand, we're still probably 60% UK in terms of our membership. So that heritage is something that we remain obviously very focused on and very proud on, and it's still our largest market. From an international perspective, it's a very rich tapestry of other professional bodies. I'm not being pejorative by calling them trade bodies, but some bodies have a more trade body type aspect. So, we collaborate with people like ULI, and certainly in the last few years, when we look at our very high level standards, in the same way that IVS, the evaluation standard, has been effectively a coalition of bodies around the world. When it looks to the sort of very high level standards around life cycle costing, and I mentioned property measurement earlier, and also the overall due diligence, we've worked with a lot of other organizations around the world as equals with them to try and collaborate and get more consistency, because that does seem to be the biggest challenge when particularly you're looking obviously from a kind of an international benchmarking point of view or portfolio management, the real challenge of getting comparability and consistency of data. So, I think it'd be wrong to say our RICS are unique. We are certainly, I think, unusual with our global scope. We're certainly unusual in the sense that we've still retained both a standard setting and a regulatory function. Quite often bodies have had that separated, and we're certainly proud that we still have that regulatory role, which goes back to our charter. I think it'd be arrogant to say that we're the only body that has the potential to influence things like data standards. There are other bodies out there. I think the privilege I certainly have working in this space is that we can do it on a kind of a non-commercial basis, so that as we've done with our work on technical data standards, we can put that in the public domain and help people adopt it without having to turn it into a kind of monetized point of view. So that's a privileged position to be. And certainly, perhaps building on an earlier point, one of the things that you know, I've talked a lot about behaviors, but the things that we're also very concerned about from a kind of data standard perspective is that data will have a provenance, that it can be traced back to a source, because, you know, obviously, you know, our members are not hobbyists. There's professional assurance provided behind the data they provide, whether it's a valuation or a condition report or some kind of opinion on benchmarking. So we're very keen that data doesn't turn into a get out of jail card, where there isn't that provenance and that lineage of the data, where ultimately you can tell where your data has come from, even if it sits in some kind of digital equivalent asset, that you can trace that back from an assurance point of view and understand where it came from, and understand that you ultimately may be able to pick up the phone to the person who produced that particular number. So we want data still to have that kind of lineage all the way back to the professionals, whether they're our ICS or other market participants, because the danger is that we'll end up with sort of digital assets where it'll be almost impossible to work out where the data came from, how was it collected, what was the methodology, can we really rely on it? And if we look at things like automated valuation increasingly using data sources, the kind of provenance and quality of these data sources will be critical.
Yeah. Titus, why did you become a chartered surveyor? What was it that appealed to you?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Also, coming back to the topic, so I would separate in two manners, right? I mean, and that's of course the RICS has a strong marketing division by now, and like also pushing ideas forward. So first of all, I became a member of the Royal Institution on a personal part side, because in Germany, and this is also kind of different to the UK. If you say you're working in the real estate industry, they are, first of all, it's even worse than the insurance industry. And then they are asking second question, I'm looking at an apartment at the moment. Can you help me on that? And then you're like, no, but real estate industry is a little bit more than like really renting out and selling single apartments. So the RICS really gave me the fit for within an industry with having a very, very hard reputation in Germany, giving you actually a fit and like a quality assurance by an association where you really say, all right, this in Germany, for example, it took me 3 years. I have like someone where I have to report to. At the end, I have an exam. I need to pass it. 50% of people are failing. So this gives like really on a personal note, the quality on being good and having the rules to conduct and doing like how we should do business within businessmen, right?
Yeah, yeah. No, good for you. I had my first MBA class today, and I usually mention the difference between business and professionals, and you know, the idea that I certainly bought in my sort of early years as a professional, the idea that the RICS stood for professional standards. So you know, a professional by definition puts society first, puts his client second, and puts himself last. And it seems to me that mantra is more relevant now than it's ever been, you know, particularly after the global financial crisis. And now when we're in a world of social impact as well being so high up the agenda, it seems to me that a professional body needs to be in place, and it needs to be respected, it needs to be supported. And you know, so I'm a fan of that, but I can't miss the fact that there's been a bit of a scandal around the RICS for the last.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I wanted to mention as well.
Yeah, so can we just bring that out and explain what the scandal was and how important it was? Does anybody know?
Yeah. Shall I handle that?
Andrew does know.
Yeah, I mean, it without going into huge granularity, the initial concern stemmed from a BDO, who are our auditors, an assessment they did a number of years ago, that there was risk. There was not actual, nothing had actually happened, but there was risk in terms of the internal controls around bank accounts, and therefore that there was a risk of things going wrong. At no time, to my understanding, was anything found that actually had gone wrong, but there was a report that said the various checks and balances that should be in place weren't sufficient to protect against that kind of risk. That then there were some issues then around how that was reported internally. Some effectively, they're not technically non-execs, but some members of, I think, management board raised the issues, and they had some concerns, and they then left their positions in what is deemed to be something that is deemed to be worthy of investigation. So we currently have a QC doing an independent review into that whole situation, both the BDO and the circumstances in which those members of the management board left the organisation in terms of their roles and responsibilities. At the same time of that, there was obviously a lot of press coverage of this, and I think that then triggered a number of concerns about how the RICS was supporting its members in views by certain members, and as part of that, another review has been kicked off to reach out to the members both in the UK and globally to get an understanding of any necessary changes of direction, ways of engagement to make sure that the organisation continues to be fit for purpose from both a member perspective, but also our broader stakeholders that we represent and support. So effectively, there's been a couple of issues that have come up, one around this BDO report that's being investigated, and a sense from a number of members that they want to kind of double check where's the institution going, how do we deal with engagement, and to some extent compounded by COVID in the sense that we also went through a period where we had a restructure internally. We unfortunately, as part of that restructure, lost a number of our colleagues. So there's been a number of things that have been widely reported where we are both doing this external review and also doing a review of the purpose, the direction, the engagement methodologies we have with our members to make sure that we continue to do what we should do as a professional body.
But also maybe to jump in there, sorry, Andrew, just to say also one thing. I mean, it's also looking on the RICS is one thing, but I think also what would help is, and Andrew Baum just said it at the beginning, it's overall a society and responsibility issue. And I think also sometimes the RICS needs to look a little bit stronger on its members, because I have never seen that a member was actually, and we know all, we have to study these rules of conduct, right? And everything. And I've never seen that a member was actually, it's not part of the RICS anymore. And this needs to be also, I think, in a communication a little bit more rough, that people are really are forcing themselves and that they don't want to do a mistake, because then they are saying, oh, I'm afraid of losing my RICS membership. And I think this also needs something, if we want to see it as a society and as a bigger picture, and seeing the RICS as something who's really pushing things forward, just to ask, be stricter with your own members also.
No, and in fact, probably it's worth you delving towards the back of the modus, because we normally do, unless it's stopped, in our monthly magazine, which is now a digital piece, we do actually list the sanctions, and if we do expel people in extreme, they are listed. I mean, it obviously doesn't necessarily make front page news. We certainly did. And the reason I laugh is there was a Channel 4 program some time ago, pre-COVID, around, I think it was called From Russia with Money or something. It was around money laundering, and we were then alerted to the behavior by one of our members in the kind of brokerage side, and we did expel them for their behavior. And you know, every month internally I see cases that our regulatory arm have conducted where people have either been fined or sanctioned, or in extreme have been ejected. And remember, we regulate firms as entities as well as individuals, so there are instances where I know there have been instances of lack of duty of care by property managers that have resulted in fires and injury, and we have taken those measures. So perhaps we should be more public, but they do take place because we do hold the members to account in that way.
I think this is a multi-channel problem personally. I mean, in the old days, there was one magazine from the RICS called, I think it was called Chartered Surveyor Monthly.
All right.
And we always used to, everybody read Chartered Surveyor Monthly.
Yeah.
You read these things, you'd read Chartered Surveyor Monthly, and eventually you'd read Property Week and whatever. But we always used to, the front end of Property Chartered Surveyor Monthly would be some news, then there'd be some learned articles, and at the back there'd be obituaries and people who'd been kicked out of the RICS for disciplinary procedures. And we'd always look at all of it, and it was steady. And I think the way in which it's no longer the BBC and ITV now; it's Netflix, and there's all these distribution channels now. Yeah. There's no longer this one source that you go to that is the Chartered Surveyor community communicating with itself. It's broadened out, hasn't it? So it's just lost that contact point, I think, to some extent.
I think that is a challenge for us, because we and also as we've moved on to digital, they perhaps have less of a the thump as they arrive on the mat in the hall in the morning. So we still have the Modus, which is our monthly magazine. We've got the journals by kind of specialist area, and obviously various pieces of digital news we put out. I think that's, as you say, Andrew, that's the challenge now in terms of just the sort of wave of information that we all get in our business lives. There's just just too much information.
Yeah, agreed. There's a couple of questions on the chat now.
Yeah, shall I answer those, Andrew? Yeah,
that would be great if you could, Andrew, and please
okay.
feel free to jump in, Titus, as well, if you've got any views.
Yeah, the first question's from John around iServe, and it's easy for me to answer this to one extent because I'm not in charge of this particular piece, but I think that this is a very good suggestion here about making it a more kind of wiki type device, and clearly as part of the review we are looking at the whole, to use the horrible marketing jargon, the kind of value proposition for our members, and I'm sure iServe will be looked at in terms of how it's monetized to members, and I'll freely admit that over the 10 years I've been at RICS, it has been a real challenge about getting iServe into a more global product, as in getting more information there that is relevant for different jurisdictions, because as we all know with the profession, you can quite easily and quite quickly get down into very specific jurisdictional information that's obviously around building control, for example, or very local standards. So you very often, whether it's building pathology or other issues like right to light, you very quickly get down that rabbit hole of very specific legislative type issues in a certain jurisdiction, and we have that to a degree even in the UK with the differences between Scotland and England and Wales, for example, and Northern Ireland. You very quickly get into that sort of challenge. So I actually will take this suggestion back, John, to my colleagues, because I think it's a very interesting idea, this kind of wiki type approach, where it might make the challenge of producing that amount of information perhaps more sustainable and scalable on a global basis. So I'll take that back to RICS and my colleagues, if I may. The next question was from David Fullerton around, quote, I'm in the business of field data collection and looking how to enable better structured big data in different industries. Do you think it's possible that a body like RICS will have the influence to influence those who collect data on things like condition reports, for example? Well, let me answer that first piece, David. Part of the work we did on the data standard actually was to look at how it would complement the recently reworked UK standard around the home survey. So actually we've done a fair amount of work around that in terms of making sure our data standard does actually look at that ability to capture in a structured way, because so often now these condition surveys are collected with handheld devices or tablets or whatever as you go around. So that's something we have done. And I think, but Titus, I think would like to chip in as well. I think you have the second question, then I'll hand across to Titus. Do you think that influence will go as far to structure and label the data collected in reports to support industry-wide data collection submitted to bodies like RICS? I think, yes, ultimately, we would clearly like to influence that. I think we're also humble enough to realise that there are a lot of other actors out there who've already built standards, and we're trying to work as collaborative as we can. We're working a lot in the UK around the residential sector, particularly where there are a lot of people building putative sort of building passports, logbooks, call you what they will. And I guess one of the frustrations I have is a lot of people build, particularly in the prop tech world, build from a use case direction rather than thinking that actually that there is a common kind of taxonomy we need that actually would support multiple use cases, whether that's conveyancing, brokerage, whether it's retrofit passports, whether it's fire data safety. So it could be quite frustrating that it would be great if we could get some common taxonomy, some APIs, and then people can build their use cases on top of a common understanding. Now, Titus, let me pass across to you.
Yeah, I think you mentioned some very good aspects. I think one big issue is what you said is for PropTechs, for example, and this is really happening often in Germany, and I think this is a phenomenon that happens everywhere. Young technology companies find a customer, and even a big customer, and they have one customer, and then they think, all right, we solved this problem for that company. It must be an industry problem. But then after a year or 2 years, and they even get funding, because everywhere is money, right? A lot of money goes into real estate, a lot of money goes into technology companies, and they get funding, and then they realize, oh, actually this was only a unique issue. I mean, there is a wider problem in the industry, but to solve this, it only helps that one company. And I think this is why it's the right approach. or the wrong approach by technology companies looking at one customer or two and trying to solve something. But at the same time, what we see with problems was, especially in Germany with one of the real estate association, they were building for 3.5 years a standard, right, a model standard, and they're using a technology, or they used a technology which is way outdated. It was outdated back in the days, and this is also mean is the wrong word probably, but you know, sometimes I make jokes by saying, all right, we come together in an appointment, and after 1 hour everybody introduced each other, and then we are leaving and saying, all right, in 4 months we are meeting up again, and then we are going to talk about the next issue. And this is of course something I think also is also not the right approach, and also not the technology companies going to establish companies and trying to solve one issue. So I think this is really still evolving and developing, and I think there's no right or wrong yet. I think what we are trying to do, these discussions about what we are planning, Andrew, these are steps in the right direction, right? So I think, yeah, maybe Andrew Baum also, you have probably also a perspective on that.
Well, I'm sort of increasingly respectful of Andrew Knight's job and the difficulties that the RICS have in trying to keep abreast of all of this. You know, change is the one thing that is always there, and you know, we've gone through such huge changes since 2007, let alone Brexit and COVID. I mean, you know, there is just constant change, and when you throw the ESG climate crisis on top of all of this, and the desperate need to drive ESG standards, you know, basically what we're doing at the moment is just a lack of transparency and clarity on reporting ESG. You know, how do you do that properly? And then the fourth industrial revolution coming on top of all of that, it's extremely difficult to stay on top of all of this. And you know, I just wish the RICS a lot of success in keeping on top of this. And you know, you've got my 350 quid for the next year, Andrew.
Thank you. No, I mean, it's interesting, Andrew, you mentioned ESG. I mean, I retain I continue to be an optimist. Now, I think maybe ESG will be, maybe a very positive driver on transparency, because as you say, I think I've certainly in sort of Chatham House discussions with a number of REITs and other asset owners, I think an understanding now that whilst in a closed room they would say they'd rather not share data, I think they're beginning to see which way the wind is blowing, if that isn't a sort of a mixed metaphor given ESG, but that I think they're realizing that actually they will have to be much more transparent about the data, about how their assets perform, and indeed that interface between the kind of, I hate the phrase landlord and tenant, but the kind of the owner and the occupier, to make sure that information barrier between what the occupier is doing from an energy performance is clearer, so that you as you know, you have those sort of tiers of alienation in commercial real estate and in resi, where you know the information barriers are just, there are so many of them. But I think ESG, because it's such an important aspect to drive, and despite the kind of multiplicity and inconsistency of ESG metrics at the moment, I'm optimistic that actually that will be a positive driver for transparency and consistency, because we simply have to solve that problem.
Yeah, I think it will be, but also if we are looking and looking into our eyes on that one, I mean, 98 or 99% of the buildings are built, right? And that's what we have to face. And 99% of these buildings are, I don't know, 20, 30, I don't have any statistics on that, so sorry for that, but pretty old. And we can talk a lot about, for example, data collection on these buildings, but this will change nothing. So I think also we really have to be honest on that one and say, all right, maybe we need to think different on how we're building. And of course, new commercial buildings, residential buildings are in a way where we can really see, all right, this is better now from an ESG perspective. But we also need to be looking to the existing buildings and really think, all right, how are we going to handle the 98%?
Oh, I agree, Tyson. I mean, I think that the big challenge is the retrofit. But I mean, I know from talking to valuers that people are beginning to recognise that there's undoubtedly a brown kind of haircut to the valuations, where people know that they're looking at either potentially a stranded asset, or an asset that will cost a lot to retrofit, or an asset that's just not suitable for that. And you know, obsolescence has always been perhaps the blind spot people have for real estate, not realising how quickly assets can become obsolete or require money to be spent. So I think you're dead right. Same with Resi, that the vast bulk of the challenge is retrofitting existing properties, and we're not going to get every property with lots of whizzy IoT and sensors, but we still need to be collecting even the bare bones of data around how they're performing from an energy consumption point of view, and at least share billing information, and also start, making sure we have greener leases and greener contracts that also make that data sharing explicit, and share the benefits of savings if landlords and occupiers, spend money on a property.
I know from Chris Goodall's book, what we need to do now. The UK housing stock is horribly inefficient compared to the German housing stock, for example, and we've got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of billions of pounds that need spending on insulating our housing stock and changing our heating systems, and that's the big job really in the real estate market, and we just need to do everything we can to that. I think ready to wrap up now. Is there anything you'd like to add, Titus or Andrew? Any closing statement before I sort of say goodbye? No?
I think the only thing I would just echo, Andrew, is I work with the Green Finance Institute on their Coalition for Energy Efficient Buildings, and you're right to highlight that challenge in the UK. There are 19 million residential buildings that need to be leveled up to EPC, I think, level C, I think it is, and that's like one building every 4 minutes over the next how many years. It's a huge challenge, but a huge opportunity. And data is core to how we're going to make that happen.
Data and education, training, absolutely. Thanks, Titus. That was just great. I just want to leave you with just to show how times change. There's my dad's original certificate from the Chartered Auctioneers Institute, 1944, when he was a student. And things change, things move, but the RICS is always there, thank God. So thanks both. It's been a great session, and we'll have a closing talk at 7 o'clock, and that's it. And thank you very much, Titus. Thanks a lot, Andrew.
Pleasure, Andrew.
Andrew, thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.